Toki. Itameksistsuko, good day. It is the windy Ikstonatsi Pikani Sopo, the very dangerously Pikani wind afternoon of Friday, the 17th of April 2020, in the lunar cycle Sayaki Sum, the duck moon, and it's a relatively warm day. I think at the height of the warmth it was maybe 13-14 degrees Celsius above zero this time. And so Chelsea and the kids decided to take a drive toward the mountains. I wanted to use this opportunity to come out and check on some of my snake dens on the west side of town here, because I know I won't get a chance to check on them for a few days, and they should be emerging if it's 13-14 degrees. I mean, that's warm enough for the old men with motorcycles in their garages to be pulling those guys out and driving them around the neighborhood. If it weren't for the pandemic, that's what we'd likely be seeing, but we can't use that as a gauge for the snake arrival this year. So I went out to check at I checked dens at 4 different areas of the west side, 2 different parks and 2 non-park cityland areas, and I found some snakes, especially at Cottonwood Park. The snakes at the dens there, the ones that I checked anyway, there are multiple den complexes at Cottonwood Park, but I stopped at just a couple of them. I went first to the den that I dropped off Mandy at a couple of years back after she rehabbed with me for the winter, and she wasn't there, but there was a large male snake basking at that entrance of that den there. There probably are other snakes back in the den proper, but that one was out there basking. And then I went over to another den complex that has multiple entrances, and there were snakes basking at one of the entrances to that complex, but not the others. There was a couple of females, it looked like, at the one. So the snakes were out. The other locations that I stopped, at Popson Park and Riverstone, and then further north along the river, past the university in the area of the Elizabeth Hall wetlands, none of them had snakes basking. In fact, I was disappointed to see that the one at Riverstone looked as though it had been molested, and somebody had poured dirt into the den entrance, perhaps trying to close in the snakes. I would suspect if it's a person that did that, no doubt that was their intended goal, to lock the snakes underground. It could have been, I'm pinning it on people, because that's the way it appeared, but there is a slight chance that there's a badger in there, that it had dug in there and then backfilled the hole, but that's not what it really looked like. I used my snake hook to kind of churn things up, and I seemed like I was able to open it back up really easily. So I think somebody went there and messed with that hole, no doubt to try to eliminate snakes, although there are snake dens, several snake dens around the Riverstone area, so it's if they only know about that one, all the better. Too bad they didn't know none. So any case, it's a super blustery day. I wasn't able to get out there, well, I got out there with the camera, but I don't think my background narrative would go too well with the wind, so I decided to pull over here at a familiar place. You saw as I was coming in here, there was as I just parked here, there was a real life tumbleweed coming through the wheat field there, and crossing and going into the coulees. That's always fun to see. And I figure I'd give you a look around. You should recognize this area. I drop lots of snakes off in this area of Popson, the Upper Popson Park. Yeah, but it's way too windy to narrate out there, so I figured I'd do it in here. Anyway, the snakes are up. The snakes are up. And from here out, you know, they'll be out and around whenever it's warm enough for them to do so, or cool enough, depending on what time of the year we're in. But any case, I'm a little bit concerned about what's going to happen this year in terms of the snakes, because there are a lot of people in the coulees. You know, we're all in somewhat isolation mode, at least. We're all responding to the COVID-19, and this means there is far more pedestrian action in the coulees for people that want to get out and get some fresh air and this kind of a thing. I'm concerned that there's going to be more than your average number of encounters with rattlesnakes this year. I've talked to the city about this, and they are of the mind, and I agree, that, you know, when people are encountering the snakes out in the snake territory, those that call into the hotline, and there's going to be a fair amount, I'm sure. Those that call into the hotline will be directed to me, and I'll be able to maybe walk them through the situation, but we will not be, most likely, unless there's weird circumstances in the situation, I won't be coming out into the coulees to move snakes that are where they should be, right? What I'm going to be doing instead is walking humans through, moving them away toward where they should be. Something like that. So, but I do appreciate if you encounter snakes and you're able to get any kind of photograph that's fairly clear of the design on the back of the snake. I could use the information for my database in terms of snake movement and that kind of thing. So I don't mind the calls this summer. I know that there's going to be more than usual coming from the natural areas. I don't mind that at all. So we'll just see what happens. I also think there's going to be an increase in, you know, wildlife encounters in the coulees in general. And like what we saw just this last week here, or a few days back, when one of the city councilmen was walking his dog back behind the Riverstone neighborhood subdivision, and he was approached by a coyote, no doubt a mother coyote who is looking out for pups who are nearby. So, but he was pretty concerned about the weird behavior of the coyote, who kept following him and his dog, and he had a large dog. So there's going to be probably more, you know, human and wildlife interfacing this summer than we've maybe ever had here for, well, at least for the past 100 years or so. In Lethbridge, more than that even. So I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully we won't have any, or many at least, hugely negative things happen. I imagine some wildlife are going to be impacted for sure. I mean, even those people who are walking out here on the coulee slopes who aren't concerned with encountering rattlesnakes, you have the potential to disturb a lot of wildlife. There are nesting, or the ducks aren't nested in there yet. Some geese are nested in the coulees, but the ducks will be there soon. The mallards, the teals, they'll all be nesting in the, you know, scrub brush, the skunk brush, and the deer brush. They're all going to be nesting in there on the coulee slopes. If you're out there walking around with kids or with dogs or what have you, even by yourself, you could really disturb those animals, and even disturb them to the point of nest failure, depending on, you know, the circumstances of the encounter and such. So I imagine wildlife is going to take a hit in this respect. We've seen, in the urban areas, the wildlife are perhaps making or gaining some what would you call it, greater access than they used to have to some of the areas like where they would have to be more concerned about running into humans or pets or these kind of things. Now they're roaming around a little bit more freely, perhaps, in some cases. It depends on what animal you are, right? Because others, I think, not so much. I mean, there's like crows and magpies who really rely on our sloppiness, and us driving around and creating roadkill and this and that. And with less human traffic, both pedestrian and auto, in our subdivisions, some of those birds are probably taking a negative impact. So there's all kinds of interesting things going on with the wildlife that I'm going to be paying attention to this summer. But main concern today was just to get out and take a look at a couple of rattlesnakes. Note that they are up and awake, and from here on out we are in rattlesnake season. So that means if you're out in the coulees, you really should be aware that this is not like your manicured neighborhood park. The coulees are a real wilderness strip, and there is a rattlesnake population here. And if you're, not paying attention, you could very easily have a negative encounter with one. My recommendations are always to kind of stick to trails. Doesn't have to be the big wide parks. Trails could, even be those kind of nice engraved deer and human and coyote trails. We've all kind of cooperated in making them over the years and maintaining them. It could be the dirt trails, what have you, but I would stick to trails in order to have the least impact on wildlife. I would leash the dogs, except maybe in the designated off leash, like the South Side Dog Run, that kind of area. But I wouldn't off leash dogs anywhere on the west side. Because there's going to be rattlesnake bites every year. There's dozens, and if there's more traffic out here this year, there's going to be more. And if that traffic is with canine, there's going to be more dogs being bit by rattlesnakes. So, my advice: stick to the trails. If you bring your dog, leash your dog, make your dog stick to the trails. And if you encounter a snake, give it room, move around it, don't disturb it. Take a picture too if you like, of course, but just give it room. If it's rattling, if it's looking at all like it senses you, then it's probably disturbed. So just give it more room. Rattlesnakes are never going to aggress on you. They're never going to come after you. Although when it first notices you, it might quickly gather itself up, and that sometimes there's a sound to that, that sometimes people believe that the snake attacked them. It's just getting in its defensive posture. So, and if you are bit by a rattlesnake, although that only happens rarely here, although, again, if there's more traffic this year, you never know. I think we average maybe one bite every 5 years or so here. But you never know what this year is going to be like. If you are bit by a rattlesnake, what you need to do is go to the hospital. Don't drive yourself. Have someone drive you, or have an ambulance come and pick you up. But basically, you want to go to the hospital. There's going to be a lot of swelling and pain involved, and you are going to want to have that swelling reduced as soon as possible. So the sooner that you get to the hospital, the better. You don't have any specific given amount of time to get there, anything like that. You're not going to die from a bite from one of these snakes, but it's going to be painful, and there'll be a lot of swelling, and the sooner that you get to the hospital, the less lengthy you're going to have to remain there. Typically it's about 3 days stay. If you're bit by a rattlesnake, there's no long lasting effects. At least not physically, although perhaps psychologically. So anyway, that's what we're looking forward to, getting into this season. The snakes are up. My friends have awoken, and they will be hanging close to the dens here for a little bit yet. We are still in our winter lunar cycles, but maybe a few weeks from now they might start moving out. We'll see. Again,